You want a real soft touch. And just bringing that aggregate to the surface. Hello, Blaine Gray, Plastering for Beginners, and today we're going to talk about a massive subject. So, a few months ago, I did a video on how to render a wall and it went horribly wrong. I recorded it, the whole thing had to be done again. I messed up massively. Actually, I'll show you a clip on how it went. I've got to pay for the materials again, and now I've got to do it again. So I've lost a day, lost money, materials, and I've lost sanity. So that's what happened. So in today's video, I want to show you the right way to render a wall. I'm going to show you where I went wrong, I'm going to address the issues, and then I'm going to make sure that you don't make the same mistake I did. And the biggest problem I had with that video, in that particular situation, was I didn't wet the walls in enough. I didn't put enough water in the scratch coat. I was just using a little brush with a little bit of water, and looking back, the wall was so dry. You need to hose the walls down properly and give a lot of water, and this way when you're applying your top coat, it's got something to grip to and it's not going to get sucked the hell out of. So that is the biggest thing, and that's where the majority of that video, that's where I went wrong. I just didn't put enough water on the scratch coat. Make sure you do the same. So the first thing we recommend is always spray and hose your walls down before rendering. Second thing, I did it on my own. It wasn't a massive area, but rendering, it's always good to have someone there to pass you the render, pass you a rule, and just help you out when it's needed. And it'll just make the job 1,000 times easier, especially rendering, which is hard going. And it pays to have a labourer with you. It just pays to get the job done that way. So make sure you get a hand there. Make sure you get a labourer. Make sure you spray the walls down. And then, all I would say is just follow the right process. So for the rest of the video, I'm going to show you the right way to render a wall from start to finish in terms of finish coat. So this is the top coat, the area after the scratch coat. So I'm going to show you the full process. So we're going to troweling, ruling. I'll show you a little brief overrun on that, and then I'll walk you into pure detail on how to not only get your walls flat, smooth, but I'm going to show you how to form angles from scratch, how to plaster, how to render flat walls, and get the whole process in. So I hope you enjoy the video. I'll speak to you after. Cheers. That's like how you top looks, man. It's okay. So that pale texture, that colour disappeared. And then, just give it a minute, let the water soak in, and then if it looks like it's still got moisture on there, you're good to go. I'm going to give it a few minutes, so I don't put the render on soaking wet. Cool. Deep squats here.
Do you want me to start recording?
No, it's alright. Doesn't go far at all, does it?
What, a bar full of render?
Yeah. That full of render goes nowhere. don't last long. Putting it on and it's empty. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the process. Like I said, you've roughly seen we're putting the render into the wall and we're just really pushing into the scratch. And that application of water at the beginning's made such a difference. You can see from ruler wall, you can pull it off and it's not fighting us. It's still got a lot of moisture in there. When you're ruling, it's easier and it's not pulling. And that was definitely the biggest mistake I made in the last video, was just not priming the walls ready for the top coat. And the mix is nice and creamy. You don't want your mix to be too thick, because you'll just struggle to spread it. And it won't grip properly. You want a bit of moisture there. So then when you're putting it into the scratch, it's got something to bind with. Give it a quick flatten, nothing crazy. Now what I like to do is put the render thicker, slightly thicker than what we've already ruled, and that way we've got something to pull. You don't want it to be too shallow because you're forever ruling off, putting back on again. And it's a pain. You want to put a section on. It's getting messy where we've got enough render down. Look at that. Render's going. Back on the old Nella carbon. Still trying to spray the bad boy in. Someone asked me on YouTube if I'm still using it. I am, but I just use it for rendering and backing work. Just trying to break it in before we get on the finish. Look at that.
Blooper reel.
That's going in the main video file. Got scared for you and I felt good bay. The other great thing is at this point, it's coming to midday, we're actually in the shade, so it's not going to splat the wall and get it really dry. It's actually the perfect condition. So I've got the thickness on. What we're doing when you're ruling off is you're following from the section you've already pulled. So when you're rendering, you work right to left. That's any rule point now is the guide. Pull off the thickness. Empty it. Come back again to the bottom. So you go horizontally. Now we check it vertically as well. Always make sure you're getting both ways. Now we know that it's flat both ways. If that's ever a sign we're doing well, it's going to be a good year, lads. Is it coming home? Good fucking year. Okay, so for the top, we haven't got a bead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to form an angle. I've got a straight, thin piece of timber here. Whacked it, I've whacked some water on, watered it down. And all you're going to do is place it on top. And actually, get my level on it as well. Do you mind pausing it? Pass me that level. Got a bit of timber, got the level, and we're doing pretty well there. Maybe a bit to the right needs to come off, but generally we've got our point. So we know that bit's flat, and then we want to level from there. Bring that to the edge, the front. Actually got a hole, make sure you haven't got any gap within the timber. And I'm gonna too far there. All we're doing for now is just forming the angle we need. We don't need it perfect. We'll get that when it comes to the floating. We need that initial angle to work with. Get rid of the excess. And then you tilt the back up, pull it across. There's your initial angle, just going to follow it through to the end there. Just keep it in line with what we've got. Ah! Needed that. Fill it in. Okay, and then one more time, rule that off. Lift it back up. Now you've got your line. Now, we've got the initial point, we'll let that take up, and then we'll finish that with floating. So that's all good. Okay, so we've applied the render, it's all on the wall, we've ruled it flat. Now it's time for the process of the finish. Basically, there's two parts to it. You've got the floating, which is basically where you flatten the wall further by taking any high spots away and filling in any spots that are low or any areas that have basically been scratched. And then after that, you've got the sponging, which is basically, as it sounds, you are just sponging the wall and bringing the texture out in the cement render. So I'm going to show you the first stage. What I'm doing here is called floating. I am holding a float. And all it is basically getting the wall even flatter. I'm going to walk you through how and when to do it. So this is an example of the render being still a bit wet when you're floating. So it is filling in, but it's also there's quite a lot of movement. I can feel on the float that if I'm too tough, I am going to pull the render off. So as you can see that section? It's where I've dug in, and what's happened is because it's still wet, instead of pulling the high spots off, it's just interrupting it. So you've got to be really careful, really slow, gently pull it off. So you've got two options here. We wait for it to dry, we just wait a little bit, or you can use, see, I'm nearly doing it again. So what happens when you're floating, you put your float flat on the wall, you do circular motions, and given the right time, you can just, what it does, it pulls the high spots off and fills in the low. But what it's doing now, you've got potential, it'll just pull the render off. But, so now we can keep on using traditional float. I'm going to show you my secret weapon and how to get over it. So, this is the Rafina Power Float. It's electric powered, you've just got one button. And basically I've been using this for about 9 months. It is a bit of a game changer, but this is perfect for when your render is on the cusp of being a bit too wet. I'll show you. amount of time that's saved, and not only that, it fills it in so much faster than traditional floating. And because it's a bigger surface area, you're guaranteed to get the wall flatter. It's a beast. Okay, so at this point I'm going to show you how to float a wall. I'm going to show you two ways to do it. The traditional way, which is a hand float, and then I'm going to show you the weapon I use when the render's soft and it's a bit harder to get. And then after that we're going to go into the sponging. So at this point on the video we're going to do all about the finish. Now let's address the elephant in the room. I've got 2 odd gloves, but the other thing, when you are using render and when you're floating up and sponging, protect your hands, because the lime in the mix will eat your skin. So keep your gloves on, just helps you a lot. I'm going to give you a quick guide back on the hand float. That was a power float. You can see it's a bit faster and it's less strenuous on the body, but I think the majority of viewers are going to be looking at this. This is just a standard float. Again, it's a Raffina one. I've got Raffina all over the place here, but any float, to be honest, will do for this. A standard PU float. As long as you break them in, they're pretty good. So you've got the holes, fill them in, but as you can see, it's still a good time to float. It's not pulling off. Now, before when I was saying it's too soft, this is the perfect time. And unfortunately people say, can you give timings for when you float up? There really isn't any guide with rendering. You've just got to do it by how it feels, and you've just got to keep testing. But this is perfect. And what you're doing when you're floating is you're pulling off any high spots and you're filling any low. So watch this section here. I'm slowly filling in as I move around. So I'm taking the render from a higher area and filling it into a low. And this is another thing, you want to be floating at the right time. You're getting this results where you can place your float flat on the wall and you can freely move it without pulling the render off, and it's perfect. If it's too dry, it just gets too much, and it'll basically, it won't fill and you won't be taking anything off. Oops, careful. That's what happens. I just caught my float on the wall. If you catch it off on an off angle instead of holding it flat, you'll just pull the render off. So as we're getting to the bottom, it is getting a bit wetter, so I'll come back up. And that's the joys of having the power float now. For them wetter areas, you can use that and still keep in the same time, because what you don't want is when you're rendering, you don't want to be coming back to certain sections because it's wetter. You want to start from the top, come down and finish it in one go. So now I'm going to finish floating this section and then we're going to sponge it. Time for the sponging. We are literally sponging. Got a car sponge, jumbo sponge. You want to drench it, get all the water out as gently as you can. We're just doing small circular motions. And what we're doing is we're bringing the aggregate out on the sand. We're just giving that traditional sand cement finish. Blending into the stuff you've already done. Make sure when you've got a build up of sand cement, you clean the sponge. Keep cleaning it out. Seems meticulous, but you'll get lines otherwise. You want a real soft touch. And just bring in that aggregate to the surface. Again, really soft. And then stopping short just where you've floated in, and then that way you can float into that section and sponge it all as well. Keep cleaning your sponge off. Bit of luck. Try and blend that in. This is probably the easiest part. It's all about having a light touch and a dry sponge, and that's how you get that crisp finish. So, I'm going to form the angle. I've got the straight edge, and I work for the camera so it's a bit arse over tip, but all we're doing is floating towards the timber. Bringing off any high spots. Got a bit of render up here. Render's really dry. Move that in. Pushing down on the timber, so we're keeping our line clean. Filling in this edge. What our job here is to just fill in the front edge so it's flush with the rest of the wall. Make sure it's in line with that bead. We've got it there. Let's do it the first edge and then slide that away. Flatten it off. Just do the same. This time, this front edge. Bit lower there. That's it. And you gently pull that away. Okay, so it's quite sharp, quite brill. Get a sponge and realise actually that needs a tiny bit of floating there. And now I'm going to do going with a float. I'm going to round it off. It's quite aggressive that. So I'm just chamfering that. Get a bit of water. Just soak the top. Now there's going to be coping stones on top, but I just wanted to show you a different angle. Got that. Punch the sponge out. And gently sponge the chamfered edge. There you go. Nice formed edge. Show the rest of the wall if you want them.